So a couple of days ago, I got this notification from Facebook, a memory of a post I made 8 years ago. And basically, it was a post about me joining a landscape photography workshop. It basically just told me that I've been doing landscape photography for the past 8 years, and it's been an amazing ride. I thought of making this video to share some things that I wish I would have known during that time that could have maybe spared me from some failed photos or maybe some disappointment. So on this video, I will talk about 5 things that I wish I knew when I was a newbie landscape photographer. Let's start with something basic and obvious, but still a lot of people miss out on. It's to never rush a shoot. What I mean is, if the light is changing, then you should keep shooting. And I did try to make that rhyme, by the way. But my point here is that no matter where you are, sometimes nature gives you that curveball right at the very end of a sunset or a sunrise, for example. It could be that you got a very dull sky when you were shooting the sunset, and just as twilight was ending, there's this nice cloud which will get some amazing lighting or whatever. Or maybe right after the sunrise, a rainbow appears. Something like that. It's not guaranteed that there will always be that special surprise at the end of every shoot, but it might happen. And if you shoot enough, it will happen. And these things just give you a bit more spice in what could have already been a very nice shoot. Or if the weather was really terrible that day, it could entirely save the purpose of that shoot. So if the light is still changing or still has some potential to change, then you should keep shooting. Don't leave right away. The second one is kind of related to the first, which is a dull shoot is never a waste of time. A dull day or a dull location. No matter how dull it is practice for you, and it will benefit you one way or another. If you're given a very nice location but the weather doesn't cooperate, this is a perfect opportunity for you to explore some other things that you can do to come up with nice photos. It doesn't really have to be always fiery sunsets or whatever. It doesn't always have to be Milky Way and a starry sky. It doesn't always have to be spectacular. And a dull shoot, even a shoot that ended up with a lot of gray skies, you can turn it around, or at the very least you can try. When you try and you keep trying, you somehow get to practice overcoming these adversities. You somehow get to practice troubleshooting these situations when you're given a shoot that you can only do for one day. Say you went to this location and you only have a day there before you move to another one, or before you go back home, and nature just throws you a curveball that you don't have a very nice sky. You should shoot anyway. This is the perfect opportunity to learn more things. Maybe try and shoot something minimalist, or be creative. Keep trying at it, and I'm pretty sure that in the future it's gonna come in handy. It's gonna give you a way to turn things around for maybe a more important shoot, or a more crucial shoot, or a more valuable shoot. It's never a waste of time. Now let's talk about spectacular locations. Yeah, when you're starting photography, starting in landscape photography, you might think that landscape photography is about capturing these amazing locations from the farthest ends of the earth, and capturing the aurora borealis and whatever. You may think that landscape is about that. It is, but it's not only about that. And what I'm saying is that you shouldn't rush yourself into that. And the problem with chasing after spectacular locations exclusively is that you're gonna miss out on a lot. And if you're a beginner who's still in the process of learning, and you just get used to shooting these spectacular locations, these landmarks that are iconic, the problem is that you might not even be ready for them. Case in point, there was this one time that was very early in my journey as a landscape photographer, maybe a year in, and I went to one of my dream locations, which is the Grand Canyon. And for someone who lives all the way up in Southeast Asia, shooting the Grand Canyon is something remarkable. I spent the entire day there, all the way till the sky was pitch black and there were a lot of stars and I could see the Milky Way, and I ended up with just terrible photos because I was not ready for that. And of course, it's a huge experience. I learned a lot from the mistakes that I had from that shoot. But maybe if I had a lot more practice at a less crucial location, I would have been ready for a better photo at that particular location. So that's why you don't want to be rushing in. In addition, I think the pandemic is actually proving that point because a lot of us are still stuck within the area where we live, and now we don't really get to travel as much. I haven't been on a plane in the past 2 years, and I could only go to locations that are maybe 3-4 hours away from where I live. And that proves the point. You should be able to shoot these less spectacular locations and turn it into something spectacular than having to rely on how iconic the place is. Because again, we're all stuck at home now. And if you're even given a window of opportunity to go out and shoot, you're only going to be able to drive a few miles away. Unless, of course, you live in a country where the pandemic response is outstanding and there's absolutely no risk, then congratulations. But if you're someone like me, I'm stuck at home, I'm thankful that I did develop that skill of finding the spectacular in the less than interesting places. So the next one, and I do think that this is the one with the most implication in the future, is that settling with some mediocre gear sets you up for failure and a lot of disappointment. And I'm particularly talking about some mediocre gear, and in particular, I am talking about pieces of gear or accessories that can ruin image quality. So these are either terrible filters with terrible color cast or flimsy tripods. Hear me out. I started shooting with a set of filters that I got for a huge bargain and were actually branded, but for some reason they were not what they were advertised to be. And obviously these filters gave me, number one, terrible color cast, and number two, it just felt like these filters absorbed moisture more than any other kind of filter. And ultimately, it led to a lot of shots that at first I thought were okay. Of course, I was a beginner and I had a lot to learn in terms of what is okay. I had a lot to learn about my personal taste and my personal treatment of my photos. And really, at first, I thought they were okay. I thought they were giving me amazing colors when it turned out that it was just color cast. And I thought that my photos were sharp, but really there was a lot of dust or a lot of moisture that stuck onto these filters. If you're sure about starting landscape photography, you better just save up a bit for the better brands and for the better quality, which I'm sure you can easily find out which ones on YouTube. That's because later on you're gonna find that your photos are just not good enough anymore. And I found that out because I wanted to print some of my photos from that time. And when I printed them, it was just a waste of money and a waste of time. Next, of course, is a flimsy tripod. You're never going to want a tripod that are more shaky than your knees when you're shooting seascapes or in really high places with a lot of wind. You should be the one shaking, not the tripod's legs. So obviously, the game in terms of landscape photography, it's not about keeping everything light, although it does have that benefit, especially if you're climbing mountains and such. But there has to be that balance in terms of weight. So it doesn't always mean that a tripod is light means it's going to be the best for you, because later on, if you're faced with a huge current or strong winds, it's going to give you a lot of camera shake. You're going to home with blurry photos and you're going to regret it one day. Now, if you're thinking that I'm a gear snob or whatever, hear me out on this last point, which is that any camera and lens can be used for landscape photography. And I'm pretty sure that you know that there are a lot of amazing photographers who shoot with their smartphones, and a lot of photographers who use gear that are not as advanced as the ones that a lot of photographers online are using or a lot of YouTubers are using. And this, I think, for most of photography is true, that you can use any camera and any lens. Of course, a certain kind of camera, maybe something with higher dynamic range or with higher resolution, would of course be more beneficial for landscape photography, especially if you're planning to produce huge prints or doing it somehow professionally. And of course, you can shoot with any kind of lens, with any kind of focal length, for as long as you're able to find that nice framing, given the limitations of whatever you have. And of course, you would hear me a lot saying that you should always have an ultra wide angle, a standard zoom, and a telephoto, and all that. But really, if you want to shoot landscapes with a 35mm, or you want to shoot landscapes with a fisheye, or maybe even a 200mm prime, you can. Because landscape photography does not discriminate that. The camera will not somehow explode or show an error message that you're not using the right lens for the right kind of photography. Remember, any focal length can be used for as long as you can be creative enough to take advantage of it. And yeah, of course, there are lenses that are sharper than some, and there are cameras that are better than some. Again, that depends on the specifications and your level of mastery. But if we put together all the modern cameras that came out maybe in the past 6 years or maybe even 8 years, and the lenses that came with them, you can shoot with them. You can shoot with any camera, any lens. And if you're able to turn things around, no matter how unusual the focal length is, it's even a bigger win because you infused a lot more creativity into it. So less than high-end gear doesn't really limit you as a landscape photographer. You can definitely keep shooting landscape photography no matter what camera you have. And it's really all in our heads sometimes, especially if you're just a hobbyist and you're not really shooting for a client with a huge specifications for the shot that you need to do. The point of photography is creating the image, no matter what camera, no matter what lens. Of course, again, there are specifics into this, but generally, any camera can be used for landscape photography, and not having the latest gear is never an excuse. Alright, if you have any more suggestions, you want to chime in, you have some reactions, don't forget to leave them in the comments. And if you haven't, don't forget to follow this channel.